Greetings everybody, Gametrog here, and today I'm going to show you how to hook up the original Model 1 SEGA Genesis using the Hyperkin HDMI cable. First thing you're going to need is a power supply. It's the 1602 or a replacement. You'll need a Model 1 SEGA Genesis, and you can tell if you have the original Model 1 if it has a volume control knob. And yours may or may not say high definition graphics across the top. There's a couple different versions, either one of them work fine. Now you will also need the Hyperkin HDMI cable set. We'll open that here in a second and show you all the parts that come with it. You will also need a standard USB wall charger, just like the ones you use for your cell phones. And at the end of the video, we'll show you how to get stereo sound out of the SEGA Genesis using the headphone jack on the front of the Genesis. Alright, before we start hooking this up, let's take a look at the back of the Genesis real quick. So your SEGA may or may not have an EXT port. It was never used, so it doesn't really matter. A channel 3/4 select switch, which we won't be using. An RF out port, which we won't be using. We will be using the AV out port, and we will be using the power adapter port. Okay, let's take a look at what comes in the Hyperkin HDTV cable for Genesis. A few different cables are packed in here. The first cable that we're going to get is the large Genesis to HDMI cable. It actually has a Genesis 2 connection on it and an HDMI plug on the other end. You will also get a Genesis 2 to Genesis 1 adapter, which we will be using since we're using a SEGA Model 1. And you get a micro USB to USB power cable. And this will be used to power the box that you see on the HDMI cable. The last thing you'll need is a USB wall charger, just like you use for a cell phone, and this will be used to power the HDMI cable. And we're going to need a 5-volt 1-amp charger, which most of them are. The USB wall charger is not included in the Hyperkin HDMI pack. Alright, now that we've gone over all the cables, let's hook them up. Grab the HDMI cable, and we're going to be using the Genesis 2 end. You'll notice there's a small arrow on the casing and a notch. Grab the Genesis 2 to Genesis 1 adapter. If you look on the Genesis 2 side, you'll also see an arrow, and all we have to do is line those two arrows up and join the cables. It can take a little bit of pressure, but it'll pop together. Now you're ready to go with the Genesis 1. So now we'll grab the Genesis, flip it around, and we are going to be looking for the AV port right here. Grab the new adapter on the end of the HDMI cable. You'll see it says top on the casing. Makes it easy. That faces up. And you just insert it into the port, and that'll go in pretty easy. And there we go. The Hyperkin HDMI cable requires power to the HDMI box. Now it may or may not get the power when just plugged into the system, but in most cases I like to use the USB cable included. All we have to do is grab the micro USB cable. You'll notice on the Hyperkin box there is a small micro USB port. We simply plug it in, nice and easy. And now we grab the USB wall charger and simply plug it into the other end. Standard stuff. Now we want to go ahead and attach the power supply. We're going to be using the SEGA Model 1 power supply, a 1602 or replacement. All we do is grab the power supply and plug it into the AC port. Nice and easy. Now, before we hook the Genesis up to the TV, we can go ahead and test the power of the HDMI cable and the power supply. The first thing we'll do is plug in the Genesis power supply and then the HDMI USB charger. Now we can see on the box right away that we've got a blue LED. That's good news. And we can throw the power on the Genesis on and we've got the red LED. So we're ready to rock. Alright, everything looks good, so let's move to the back of the TV. So what we're looking for are the HDMI ports. This particular TV has 3, HDMI 1, 2, and 3. You can use any one you want, as long as it's available, but in this case we're going to use HDMI 1, and just make sure you remember which one you used. Now let's take our SEGA Genesis and pop in a game. Let's do Sonic 2. Turn her on. We got power, we're good to go. Alright, let's grab the remote for the TV, and what we're going to be looking for is the input button. Now it could say input, or it could say source. Either one of these buttons will cycle through the input options that you noticed on the back of your TV. Flip the TV on, grab your remote, and cycle through your inputs until you find the input you plug the HDMI cable into, and bam, there's your game. Let's talk a second about the aspect ratio. You may have noticed that Sonic is not filling up the entire screen. That's because these old games were designed when TVs were in a 4:3 format, more square than widescreen. So when displayed in normal 4:3 mode, you'll have black bars on the left and right, and you may even see a solid color on the sides. This is called the overscan, and not seen on a 4:3 TV. Hyperkin gives you the option to display in 4:3, or switch it to 16:9 for widescreen. With your SEGA Genesis off, all you have to do is switch the setting to which one you prefer. Now when you switch it to 16:9, all it's doing is stretching the image left and right. It's not actually showing you more of the game screen, so the picture will appear a little distorted, but after playing for a minute you won't even notice. You can use either method you want, it really comes down to preference. Optional stereo sound from the SEGA Genesis. The AV port on the back of the SEGA Genesis Model 1 does not output stereo sound, only mono. To get stereo sound, even when using the HDMI cable, we'll have to use the headphone jack on the front of the Genesis. We're going to grab the headphone jack and we'll slide it right into the port on the front. Go ahead and make sure your volume is turned all the way up. You will have to attach the stereo cables from the headphone jack to an actual stereo or separate audio system. And then take your audio cables and plug them into any available port on the back of your stereo system. It doesn't matter if it's labeled Tape 1 or Phono or CD, that's just the selection you're going to pick on the front of the stereo. And you'll just turn the volume down on your TV. So you've got your game playing on the TV and you've got your audio coming through your stereo system. Troubleshooting. A lot of times if your game's not working, it's probably the game itself. The blade on the bottom that connects with the Genesis can get quite dirty. We can easily clean this by using some rubbing alcohol. Simply grab some rubbing alcohol, grab a Q-tip or cotton swab, dip it into the alcohol, and then scrub both sides of the blade, running back and forth along all the contacts. And this will normally result in a dirty Q-tip. And now that game is clean. Now that blade actually slides into an insert in the cartridge bay, which can also get dirty sometimes. So I like to take the cartridge while it still has a little bit of the alcohol from the cleaning and insert it into the SEGA a couple times to scrub the contacts on the inside. It's not going to hurt the system or the cartridge, the alcohol will evaporate quickly. Do that a couple times, and now see if your game works. If it doesn't, try a different game. That should have you up and running. If you have any questions, you can reach me at Gametrog.com.